Hello everyone, good evening. We have another great story for you. I had to get my drink. Happy New Year. Here we are into 2025. Put my drink over there, and I definitely got to turn on my little fan here so I don't get overheated. How is everyone tonight? I hope you're doing good. Thank you all for coming in. And our story is another Debbie Macomber. And it is starting now, another Blossom Street novel. That's right. And we are going to get started. Oh yes, it's cold outside. That's for sure. We want the snow, most definitely. I'll turn your comments here so I can see them better. There we go. And we are going to get started on chapter 1. I'm going to turn the music down here now. There we go. Oops. There we go. Music off so you can hear my reading. I want to welcome everyone in. Thank you for coming in. We'll put that over there. A Blossom Street novel starting now by Debbie Macomber. This was it. Surely it must be. The instant Libby Morgan heard her paralegal tell her Herschel would like to see you in his office, she knew. Oh, there'd been rumblings around the office about layoffs and early retirements, such as gossip, simply verified what she felt in her heart. Herschel was sure to tell her. She waited for this moment for 6 long years. Libby had always wondered how she'd feel when she finally got the news. She longed to hold on to this sense of happy expectation for as long as possible. In retrospect, must have intuitively known something was up because she had worn her best pinstripe suit today, choosing the pencil skirt over her normal tailored slacks. And thankfully she had a salon appointment just the day before. Getting her hair cut was long overdue, but seeing how good it looked now, she felt it was worth every penny of the $100 Jock had charged her. A good cut did wonders for her. She wore her dark brown hair parted in the middle in an inverted bob so that it framed her face, curling around her jawline. Jock had mentioned more than once how fortunate she was to have such thick hair. She hadn't felt that way when he'd insisted she have her eyebrows plucked, but he'd been right. She looked good, polished, professional. She promised herself not to go so long between appointments again. Libby didn't see herself as any great beauty. She was far realistic and sensible, and was well aware of her physical shortcomings. At best, she was pretty, or at least Joe, her ex-husband, had told her she was. She knew she was probably no better than average features, but on the inside, she was a dynamo, dedicated, hardworking, goal-oriented, perfect partner material. Reaching for her yellow legal pad, Libby headed toward the managing partner's opulent office. Outwardly, she remained calm and composed, but inwardly her heart raced and her head spun. Finally, she was about the hard choices and sacrifices. Libby was in her sixth year of an internship track. Hopefully, she was about to achieve that she had set her heart on the minute she had been accepted as an associate in the Trust and Estates Department of Burkhart, Smith, Randall, a high-end Seattle-based law firm. She was about to be a partner, even earlier than anticipated. While she didn't want to appear overly confident, it went without saying that no one deserved it more than she did. Libby had worked harder, longer, and more effectively than any other attorney employed by the firm. Her legal expertise on the complex estate planning prospect for Martha Reed hadn't gone unnoticed. Libby had provided a large number of billable hours, and the older woman had taken a liking to her. Over the past month, two partners had stopped by her office to compliment her work. Libby could almost feel her mother looking down on her from heaven, smiling and proud. Molly Jo Morgan had died of breast cancer when Libby was only 13. Before dying, Libby's mother had taken her daughter's hand and told her to work hard and to never be afraid to go after her goals. She had advised Libby to dream big and warned her there would be hard choices and sacrifices along the way. That last summer her mother was alive had set Libby's life course for her. Her mother wouldn't be around to see her achievements. Libby longed to make her mother proud. Today was sure to be one of those "Hey Mom, look at me" moment. Early on in high school, Libby had set her sights on becoming an attorney. She was the president of the debate club and was well known for her way of taking either side of an issue and making a good argument. Reaching her goal hadn't been easy. Academic scholarships helped, but there were still plenty of expenses along the way. Funds were always tight. In order to support herself through college, she had worked as a waitress and made some good friends. Later in law school, she found employment as a paralegal in the Seattle area. Her career path had taken a short detour when she married Joe Wilson. Joe worked as a short order cook. They had met at a diner where she waited tables while in college. When she moved from Spokane, he willingly followed her to the Seattle area and quickly found another job, cooking in the diner. He was the nicest guy in the world, but their marriage was doomed from the beginning. Joe was content to stay exactly where he was for the rest of his life. Libby was filled with ambition to be so much more. The crux came when he wanted her to take some time out of her career so they could start a family. Joe wanted children, and so did Libby, but she couldn't risk being shunted off to the mommy track at the firm. She had asked him to be patient for a couple more years. Really, that wasn't that long. Once she was established at the firm, it wouldn't matter so much, but Joe was impatient. He feared that once those 2 years were up, she'd want another year and another. Nothing, she said, would convince him otherwise. Herschel glanced up when she entered his office. He wasn't smiling. But that wasn't unusual. "Sit down, Libby," he said, gesturing toward the chair on the other side of the desk. One day her office would look like this, Libby mused, with old-world charm, comfortable leather chairs, polished wood bookcases, and a freestanding globe. Pictures of Herschel's wife and children stared back at her from the credenza behind his desk. The one of him sailing never failed to stir her. Herschel had his face, his hair wind-tossed as the sailboat sliced through the Pacific Ocean on a clear day, with a sky as blue as the Caribbean waters. The sailboat keeled over so close to the water's edge she wanted to hold her breath for fear the vessel would completely overturn. The photograph inspired Libby because it proved to her that one day, as partner, she too would have time to vacation and enjoy away from the office. To do that, her work, her commitment to the law firm and her clients had to be her sole focus. Libby sat in the chair Herschel indicated and relaxed her legs. She knew the managing partner's agenda. What hadn't she expected was the deeply etched look of concern on his face. Oh, it would be just like Herschel to lead into this announcement continuously. "I've taken a personal interest in you from the day the firm decided to hire you," he said, setting his pen down on his desk. He took a moment to be certain it was perfectly straight. "I know, and I'm grateful." Libby rested her back against the comfortable padding. "It's been a wonderful 6 years. I've worked hard, and I feel that I am an asset to the firm. You have done an excellent job." Libby resisted the impulse to remind him of all the billable hours she piled up on a number of accounts. "Thank you, Paula. Yes, it is. It's only going to get better, let me tell you. It always starts out slow, but it's getting there." Libby took a moment to savor his words. Herschel wasn't known to hand out praise freely. "Thank you." She sat up straighter now, anticipating what would come next. First he would smile, and then he would announce that after discussing the matter with the other partners, they would like to. Her projection was interrupted when Herschel went on to say, "I'm sure you are aware that the last 6 months have been a challenge for the firm." He met her gaze head on, and in his eyes she read regret and concern as his thick brows came together. "We've experienced a significant decline in profitability due to the recession." A tingling sensation started at the base of Libby's neck. This conversation wasn't taking she anticipated. "I've certainly carried my load," she felt obligated to remind him. More than any other attorney on staff, especially Ben Holmes, she thought, but she didn't say it. At 6 o'clock, like a precision timepiece, Ben was out the door. Herschel picked up the same pen he so carefully positioned only a few moments before and held it between his palms. "You've carried a substantial load, which is one of the reasons why this decision has been especially difficult." "Decision?" she repeated, as a sense of dread quickly overtook elation she had experienced earlier. The problem is your lack of making rain, he said. You haven't brought any major clients into the firm. Meeting potential clients was next to impossible with the hours she worked. Libby had tried attending social functions, but she wasn't good as power schmoozing the way others were. She felt awkward inserting herself into conversations or initiating them herself. With little to talk about besides work, she often felt inept and awkward. She hadn't always been this shy, this hesitant. Herschel, she said, voicing her suspicion, her greatest fears. What are you trying to say? You aren't laying me off, are you? She finished with a short, disbelieving laugh. The senior partner exhaled slowly and nodded. I can't tell you how much I regret having to do this. You aren't the only one. We're letting 5 go in all. As you can imagine, this hasn't been an easy decision. Libby's first concern for her paralegal. Sarah, she's fine. She'll be reassigned. Libby's heart slowed to a dull thud. Poor Libby. I can just imagine how she's feeling. We're offering you a generous severance package. Herschel continued the details, but Libby sat frozen, stunned, unable to believe this was actually happening. People she worked with, people she knew, were losing their jobs. She was losing her job. And she sensed that. She didn't like to think she was out of touch with reality, that she hadn't picked up on it. I'd also like to offer you a bit of advice, Libby, if I may. The shock had yet to dissipate and become her throat had gone dry, and she didn't respond. All she could manage was to stare at him, aghast, disbelieving, shaken to the very core of her being. I don't want you to think of this as the end. This is a new beginning for you. One of the reasons I've taken a personal interest in you is because you're very much the way I was years ago. I felt the need to prove myself too. I set my sights on making partner to the exclusion of everything else, the same way I've seen you do. I completely missed my children's childhoods. By the time they were in high school, they were to me. Thankfully, I've been able to make up for the time. The point is, I sacrificed far too much, and I see you making the same mistakes I did. Libby tried to focus, but couldn't get her past the fact she was suddenly unemployed. She blinked a couple of times in effort to absorb what was happening. It didn't help. The sickening feeling in the pit of her stomach intensified. I hope, Herschel continued, that you will take this time to find some balance in life, starting now. Pardon? She asked, looking up and blinking. Some of the numbness had begun to wear off. All Libby could think of was the fact that she had given her life, her marriage, her everything to this firm, and they were about to shove her out the door. I want you to enjoy life, Herschel repeated. A real life with friends and interests outside of the office. There's a whole world out there ready for you to explore. Libby continued to stare at him. Didn't Herschel understand? She had a life, and that life was right here in this office. She was passionate about her work, and now it was being ripped away from her. Who will take over working the Martha Reed, she asked. Surely this was all a big mistake. Martha Reed was the one of their most important clients, and she enjoyed working with Libby. Libby, you're not listening. The decision has already been made. The firm is being more than generous. Hello, Deidre. How are you? Happy New Year. I can't believe it. I'm so happy you are. Thank you for coming in. Generous, she repeated, and gave a humorless laugh. Anger took hold, and then she surged to her feet. The legal pad fell unnoticed to the floor as she knotted her fists at her sides. This is a decision unworthy of you, Herschel. You're making a mistake. I thought you had my back. She could feel the heat crawling up her neck. Oh, wow, it's 3:22 a.m. Well, thank you so much for coming in and being with us. She could feel the heat crawling up her neck, creeping into her face, and snapped her clothes. Arguing was pointless. As he said, the decision had been made. But by heaven, she wanted him to know she wasn't taking this sitting down. Stabbing at an index finger on his desk, she looked at him hard in the eyes and said, I hope you know I'll have another job before the end of the day. For your sake, I hope you don't. But if that's the case, then so be it. I'm going to regret this, Herschel. I've given you and this firm everything. Without bothering to argue more, she whirled around and stormed out of his office. With her heart pounding wildly, Libby approached her own small office where Sarah saw Libby, the paralegal, stood. Her brown eyes were expectant. Well, Sarah asked. I've been laid off. Sarah's face went slack. You're joking. A security guard came to stand just outside her door, watching as she packed up her things. Libby jerked open the desk drawer and started emptying the contents onto her desktop. Does it look like I'm joking? Sarah wore the same stunned expression as Libby had only moments earlier. But why? Ask Herschel. Libby pinched her lips closed as she struggled to rein in her outrage. What about me? Sarah sank into the chair as her knees had given out on her. Thank you, Dee. Not to worry. I already asked. You'll be reassigned. I can't believe this. You, Libby choked out, now dumping the contents of her drawers into a tote bag, and she kept on hand. What are you going to do? Do, Libby repeated, as the answer should be self-explanatory. What else is there to do? I'll have another job. I'll be working for another firm before I'm out of this building. I told Herschel, and I meant it. Jeff Goldstein had just been after me for years. This was no exaggeration. Jeff had contacted her 2 or 3 times since she had been with Bernhardt, Smith, and Crandall to see if she was happy in her current position. He was the first person she'd call. Already having a list of potential firms was scrolling through her mind. Any number of law offices would consider themselves fortunate to get her. Slamming her final drawer closed, she reached for her briefcase and dumped it onto her desk and the files that she had spent hours working on at home the previous night. Next, she hefted the bag containing the personal items from her desk drawer and over her shoulder. Libby, Sarah said, eyeing the security guard. Frankly, she couldn't get away fast enough. I don't think I could stand it here a minute. Herschel had offered her fatherly advice, sounding so righteous and superior, so patronizing. Well, she'd show him. He would rue the day. He made a huge mistake and was about to see just how wrong he was. Throughout her life, Libby had faced challenge after challenge and proved herself again and again. This would be no different. If her mother's death had taught her anything, it was that Libby should do whatever she needed to rise above the setbacks, and she'd survive. She had lost her mother when she was far too young, and she had gotten through her divorce. She'd weather this too, just the way she had everything else. Forcing herself to smile, she swallowed hard and looked at Sarah. Keep in touch. I will, her paralegal promised. You'll let me know land, won't you? Of course. When she did, asked Sarah to join her. They were a good team. They worked together for so long that they'd become like running partners, keeping pace with each other, intuitive each other's needs and expectations. When she had last spoken to Jeff Goldstein, Libby had insisted that if she was ever to join his firm, he'd need to hire Sarah. Jeff had assured her it wouldn't be a problem. Hello, Sylvia. Happy New Year, honey. Thank you for coming in. Without a backward glance, Libby walked out of the office. She felt her staff members staring at her, but she chose to ignore them. Standing in the doorway to his office, Ben Holmes started to say something. But after one glaring look from Libby, he apparently changed his mind. Good thing Ben wouldn't want to hear what she had to say to him. Her cell phone was in her hand even before she reached the elevator. After a quick call to directory assistants, she connected with Goldstein and Goldstein. Jeff Goldstein, please, she said to the receptionist. Tell him Libby Morgan is calling. She was connected immediately. Libby, how are you? Fabulous, she got to the point. You called a few months back and asked if I would be in my current position. Remember? Of course. But that was over a year and a half ago. That long? Time had gotten away from her. As it happens, I'm free to come on board with Goldstein and Gold. No, no need to hint at what she wanted. Libby preferred the direct approach. Really, his voice dipped slightly. As I said, that was well over a year ago. We've had a sharp decline in business since then. Almost everyone has. We aren't currently taking on any associates. The news deflated her, but Libby wasn't discouraged. Not a problem, Jeff, she said, continuing to walk at a clipped pace. She was outside the building now, joining the traffic on the Seattle sidewalk. Her steps, brisk and purposeful. Dark, overcast March sky was an accurate reflection of her mood. It was sure to start raining at any moment. I'm sure with your track record, you won't have a problem finding another position, Jeff continued. I don't think I will either, she said, making sure her voice reflected an air of confidence. I wanted to give you the first opportunity since you pursued me in the past. I appreciate if there's something does come up, you'll be the first person I contact. Wonderful. Thank you for your time, Libby said. No problem. Will do, she said, cutting off the words as a rush to end the call. She regretted calling Jeff in an angry flush. She should have given the conversation more thought instead of acting out of emotion and outrage. Even now she was fuming, caught between disbelief and indignation. The walk to her condo took 15 minutes. The distance was what she considered her daily workout. Her building was on a busy street and safe enough for her to hoof it both early in the morning and late at night. She hoped she'd be able to continue to walk to and from work at her new firm. Shifting the load from one another to the other, Libby struggled to maintain her composure as she walked through the front door. She had been so certain that this was it, so confident that her hard work and sacrifices were finally being recognized. To get laid off instead was unbelievable. Only now was the truth of it beginning to sink in. Libby had always been driven to succeed. She had been the valedictorian of her high school and been in the top 10% of her class in both college and law school. She had worked hard for those grades. She worked hard for everything. With her arms wrapped around her middle, Libby walked around the living room 3 times, her mind racing as a speed to revel any NASCAR engine. The sky had gone even darker, and a drizzle splashed against the window, weaving wet and crooked trails on the glass. This was March in the Pacific Northwest. Libby needed to think. First things first, update her resume. She turned on her 1-cup coffee maker, brewed a mug, and carried it into her home office. Setting it down on a coaster, she looked at the picture of her mother that rested on the corner of her desk. Her mother's eyes seemed to focus directly on hers. "I know, Mom. Don't worry. This is the only temporary. All is not lost." It was then that Libby noticed the plant next to her mother's framed photograph. She didn't even know what kind it was, but regardless, it was brown and shriveled. It had withered with neglect. And that takes us up to chapter 2. I'm going to take a short break and get a drink, and I will be right back. Thank you all for coming in. If you haven't done so already, hit that like for me. I would appreciate it. And tell your friends this wonderful story starting now. And as we see in chapter 1, poor Libby worked so hard and sacrificed so much for making partner in her law firm, and what happens? They let her go. I mean, hi, Mary Jo. Hi, honey. It's terrible that they just let her go. So yeah, I'm going to take a short break. I'll be right back. You know what they say, when you read, you have to wet your whistle. Hit my camera, especially when you read out loud. Yes, happy New Year, Mary Jo. Oh my gosh, I'm so happy to see all of you in here tonight. How is the story so far? Do you guys like it? We are back on Blossom Street again, but we are with Libby Morgan this time. I just do too. It's a good story. Okay, now let's get my pen back up there. Knocked it over. Four later, we are on chapter 2, but it's 4 months later. With her briefcase clenched in her hand, Libby Morgan left her latest interview with a gut-wrenching feeling that she wouldn't get this job either. The economy was killing her chances. Her resume highlighted her professional qualifications. Her letter of recommendation, and yet nothing had panned out. 4 months. Finding another position shouldn't have been a problem, only it was. No one was hiring. No one was interested. Libby lost count of the number of firms where she had applied to, the number of interviews she had sat through. She followed leads from friends, yet still nothing. Oh, she'd come close any number of times, but up until now, she had always come second or third. Her ego was in the gutter, and her self-esteem was dragging close to the sea floor. Livy never had been this depressed in her life. Having nothing to do with her time was slowly killing her. She desperately needed to work. As she walked into her car, she tossed her briefcase onto the sofa and sagged into the thick cushioned seat. The middle button of her suit jacket had stretched to the breaking point. On top of everything, she'd gained weight. 10 pounds. 10 ugly pounds. She unfastened her jacket and let out a twisted sigh. Nothing fit right. Nothing felt right. Not her life, clothes, nothing. The phone rang, and thinking it might be a potential employer, Libby leaped for it. Libby Morgan, she said, doing her utmost to sound upbeat and positive. Libby, it's Sarah. How'd the interview go? Appointment. Who was she kidding? No one was going to call her about a job. It's the same old story. There are at least 40 candidates for every opening. Even before the interview was finished, Libby knew she wasn't a contender. In the months since she had left Burkhart Smith and Crandall, she developed a sixth sense about her chances. 2 or 3 times she knew she was in the running. Second and even third interviews followed, and yet it was always the same outcome. Sorry, another time. Close, but no cigar. How's the office? Libby asked. Her one lingering hope was that Herschel and the other partner would recognize their mistake, ask her to return. Had she would have taken pleasure in laughing in their faces and telling them to take a flying leap. Pile. Over the last several weeks, though, her attitude had softened considerably. She wanted to work, needed to work. She couldn't take this endless battle of building herself up for the next interview, only to be dashed against the rocks of self-doubt and frustration. I was so hoping it would work out this time, Sarah continued. Libby had too. Don't get discouraged, Sarah said. Yeah, like that was possible. She felt beaten down and defeated, and it wasn't even noon yet. Gotta scoot. Bye. Her paralegal's calls weren't as frequent as they had been the first month. In fact, these days, it was usually Libby who contacted Sarah. The paralegal was preoccupied, and their conversations were short. Libby knew that Sarah found it difficult working for Ben Holmes. She'd gladly follow Libby into another law firm given the opportunity. What she needed, Libby decided, was a break. She hadn't been to Spokane since Christmas 2 years ago, hadn't seen her father or stepmother in that long. Libby got along fine with Charlene, the woman her father had married when he was a high school senior. Their relationship was warm. Charlene was pleasant enough, but she had no intention of mothering Libby, which was fine by her. Libby held on to the memories of her mother and worked hard to live up to the potential Molly had seen in her. Unfortunately, Libby had never been particularly close to her father. He was a civilian working for the Air Force as a computer analyst and had always been distant. The small family had gotten their first emotional hit when Libby's older brother, Timmy, was killed while riding his bike when he was 10. A drunk driver had hit him and sped away. Her father had taken the tragic death of his son especially hard. Although Libby was only vaguely aware of it, Timmy's death had put a strain on her parents' marriage. Then her mother had been diagnosed with cancer. Robert Morgan seemed to close himself off from life after his son's death. In many ways, that drunk driver had claimed more than her brother's life. He destroyed the family. Her mother and father were never the same. Gone were the days when her father would laugh and tease her. As an only child, Libby loved it when her father would pick her up and twirl her around and around. She couldn't remember him playing with her like that after they lost Timmy. It was just the two of them. Robert and Libby rarely spoke. The day she was admitted into the National Honor Society, her father hadn't come to the school for the presentation. He hadn't taken pictures of her and her date for the high school senior prom the way the other parents did. And for her birthday and Christmas, he gave her cash. He simply didn't seem to care. Still, he was family, her only family. It was her mother Libby missed. Now more than ever, she longed to burrow into her mother's arms and be comforted by her warm embrace, just as she had done when Libby was young and frightened. Her mother had always found a way to cheer her. In the first grade, when Libby hadn't gotten an invitation to a birthday party, her mother had taken her to a fancy restaurant for tea. They had worn special hats and gloves and dined on cucumber sandwiches. All these years after her mother's death, Libby still missed her hugs and the notes her mother used to write and tuck into her sack lunch. Reaching for her phone, Libby looked up at the Spokane number for her father on the contact list, a sad commentary on its own. She answered on the third ring. "Hello, Libby," she said, sounding pleased to hear from her. They spoke for a few moments, exchanging pleasantries, before Libby asked, "I was wondering if you and Dad have this weekend. I thought I might drive over for a visit." Charlene hesitated. "Is everything all right?" "Oh, sure, I just need a change of pace." What she needed was purpose, something to do other than sit around the condo and totally go insane. "You aren't working yet?" "Not yet." The words nearly stuck in her throat. She felt like such a loser. "What you need is a little TLC," Charlene muttered sympathetically. "Come visit, and I'll make you some comfort food. I've always got a new macaroni and cheese recipe I've been meaning to try." "I don't need macaroni and cheese," Libby cried, on the tail end of a hysterical laugh. "I need cottage cheese." "Oh, dear, have you gained weight?" "It's the ice cream," Libby lamented. Late nights with Jay Leno. Late nights with Jay Leno. Oh, my goodness. My goodness. And the feature flavored of the month were the culprits. With no reason to go to bed, she was up till 1 or 2 in the morning. Libby knew she'd quit the nighttime snacks, but she couldn't. She just couldn't discipline herself to do it. Her comforts were few. Until the last few months, Libby had no idea how consoling ice cream could be for a troubled heart and mind. Yes, he does very nice, does he? Now, Charlene seems she's a little more, I'll give you some TLC. "Join a gym," Charlene suggested. "It'll help. Here's your father." Libby, what's up? Robert Morgan asked. He had never been a warm and fuzzy father, but after losing Timmy and Molly, he wasn't entirely sure what to do with Libby. I thought I'd drive over to Spokane, Libby said. It's been a while since I was last home. You mean to say you still don't have a job? The question felt like an accusation. I'm trying, Dad, she said, fighting response. It wasn't like she hadn't put effort into the job search. She'd run herself ragged, cheerfully subjecting herself to one rejection after another. It seemed the longer she was employed, the harder it was to foreign interest in a potential employer. Well, you're welcome to visit. Heavy emphasis was placed on the last word. Visit, not stay. Visit. Libby exhaled, slowing down yet another bitter lesson in humility. Thanks, Dad. That weekend, Libby drove over to Spokane on a Saturday morning and stayed until late Sunday. It was short and sweet. Charlene looked on sympathetically as her father found it important to ply her with unsolicited and unwelcome advice. Don't be a quitter. Try harder. Don't be so picky. Be willing to start at the bottom. Prove yourself. Things as if hadn't been trying. Monday morning, following her stepmother's advice, Libby found a local gym on the internet, stopped by for a tour, and at a 12-month contract. She should be watching her pennies more closely, but at the rate she was gaining weight, it would be cheaper to pay gym fees than it would be to purchase an entire new wardrobe. She had needed if she got too fat to fit into the one she already owned. Do I need a special workout clothes for the yoga and I don't know that word, ballet classes? She asked the perky girl who had given her the tour of the facility. She introduced herself as Gina, and she had Miss Universe figure. Nothing special, just something loose and comfortable. Libby snickered. If I had anything loose, I wouldn't be enrolling at the gym. Funny. Libby didn't think it was that humorous. The next morning at 8, she arrived to find the gym packed. Every machine was in use, and the sound of the whirling wheels filled the cavernous room. Libby had chosen to wear sweatpants and a t-shirt and felt incredibly out of place. The other women wore stylish, colored, coordinated outfits. Looking around, she was convinced she was the fattest woman in the room. You have my machine, a tall, good-looking man around her age offered when she approached the row of treadmills. Thanks. She waited until he finished, stepped onto the base, and set the at a brisk pace to walk a mile and a half. Before she finished, she thought she would throw up. Libby had no idea how badly out of shape she was. Afterward, in an effort to catch her breath, she sat in the dressing room on a bench and bent forward, elbows on her knees. The wall clock told her it was 9. She would be at the desk right now if she still worked at the firm, and would probably have already put in 2 hours of hard work. Those days were gone. Now the rest of the day stretched out before as a complete. At least now she was walking off the pounds she'd gained. After showering and changing clothes, she returned to her condo and spent the next hour on the computer in a futile job search. She broke for lunch, watched the noon news on television. 15 minutes of getting hooked on the storyline, she abruptly turned it off and headed back to the computer. A couple of days last week, she had actually taken thought to take a nap in the middle of the day. It was outrageous. The mere thought of watching soap operas and taking naps horrified her. An unknown person. I'm losing words. Thought. Oh, am I skipping words again, you guys? Whoa, knocked the camera down. I need to keep my voice a little lower. Sometimes it's my voice, y'all. Like if I get into the story and I emphasize a word, that's when it cuts out. So I will not get so passionate about my reading. The mere thought of watching soap operas and taking naps horrified her. An unknown person was taking over her body, and she had to find a way to stop this hostile takeover. When she arrived at the gym the next morning, a professional-looking woman around her age opened the locket next to Libby's. She looked vaguely familiar. Then it hit her. She was an attorney at one of the bigger law firms in town. It took Libby a few minutes. Oh, thanks, Mary Jo. I do get passionate when I read. I'm sorry, I get really into it. Yeah, it's the microphone. I've tried backing it off. I've tried toning it down. I've done everything I can to but my sweetheart told me it's only, thank you, Dee. My sweetheart told me it's only when I get really passionate in the reading and get in that he notices. Yeah. She looked vaguely familiar. Then it hit her. She was an attorney at one of the biggest law firms in town. It took Libby a few minutes to recall her name. Megan, Maggie, no, Maddie something. Oh, why hadn't she paid more attention? Her father had offered one bit of good advice. He suggested Libby needed to network more. The problem was Libby had been so intent on making partner that she hadn't invested a lot of professional friendships. It wasn't that she didn't have friends. She made an effort to keep in touch with a few people from college and from law school. Her problem was she didn't know how to network. She was willing to learn. At this point, she was willing to do just about anything that would lead to a job. There was no time like the present. Hi, Libby said, closing her locker. It's Maddie, isn't it? Maddie turned to look at her, but her face was blank. I'm Libby, she said, smiling. Libby Morgan from Burkhart Smith and Crandall. No need announcing she was currently without employment. Oh, hi. It didn't look like Maddie recognized her. Libby wasn't sure what to say next. You've come here often? Oh dear, that sounded like a pickup line. I just signed up. This is my first week, and I have to tell you, this is hard work. She waved her hand under her armpit in a half-hearted attempt to be funny. Actually, she probably looked more. I'm here 3 mornings a week, Maddie said, and she turned her to the friend on her other side. The two of them and went into the gym. Embarrassed, Libby looked away. She picked up a hand towel on her way into the main floor and got out a machine. The stair stepper was available, and she figured she'd give it a try. 30 minutes later, Libby felt like she needed to be resuscitated. Her lungs burned and her calf muscles screamed in protest. Gina, the Miss Universe double, who had given her the tour of the gym, noticed, and while Libby sucked in breaths, Gina made a number of suggestions about a physical fitness sounded painful. From now on, when Herschel had first suggested she get a life, Libby had been offended. Her life was just fine. Thank you very much. She enjoyed her job and lived in a nice condo. Really, there wasn't anything she wanted or needed beyond that. Well, other than making partner. In the weeks and months since, she'd come to realize she'd been right. If she was going to be honest, most of her friends were more like acquaintances. She felt completely inept at making new ones. Without a job, she felt like she was a fish out of water. Back at home, Libby reached for her phone and called Robin Hamlin, who was the closest of her school friends. The two had been study partners in law school. Robin worked as a prosecutor for the city of Seattle and was driven and dedicated as Libby. 90 minutes later, Robin returned the call. "What's up?" Robin asked in her usual no-nonsense way. "Can you meet me for lunch?" "When?" Robin asked, sounding "Any day this week, or next, or the one after that," thought Libby. "Thursday's open, noon, at the French Cafe on Blossom Street." "Sure." Libby didn't know the French Cafe on Blossom Street, but it sure would only take a click of her mouse to locate the restaurant. "Good to see you then." How many of you remember the French Cafe on Blossom Street from the last book? How awesome is that? On Thursday, Libby had already claimed one of the few tables and ordered their lunches when Robin arrived 10 minutes late. "Sorry, I got here as soon as I could." "No problem." Her friend looked good, maybe a tad overweight, but Libby wasn't one to throw stones, especially since she couldn't button her own pants. Robin wore a crisp navy blue business suit with a straight skirt. Her hair was short. Libby remembered it. Actually, she couldn't remember the last time they'd gotten together. They had talked on the phone a couple of times, but they were very short, brisk conversations. Libby wondered if that was the way she had appeared to others in the past. Probably. She was always rushing to finish a brief or late to a meeting. "I ordered this for us," Libby said. She'd known Robin would be late and short on time. "What am I having for lunch?" Robin asked, laughing. "Half a turkey sandwich with split pea soup and iced tea." "Perfect." Robin pulled out a chair and sat across from Libby. The umbrella shaded them both from the July sun. As soon as Robin was seated, the server dropped off both lunch plates along with 2 tumblers filled with iced tea, and then left with the plastic order number Libby had placed on the table. "How's the job search going?" Robin asked as she reached for her half sandwich. Libby hesitated, unwilling to admit how desperate she was. "It's going." "You found a job?" Libby shook her head. Robin paused with the sandwich halfway to her mouth. "You got to be kidding." "I wish I was." Her friend shook her head. "I might be able to get you an interview with the city working as a prosecutor." Libby held up her hand. "I appreciate the thought, but no thanks." She had seen how Robin had changed since she had taken the job with the city. Being exposed to the criminal element day after day had given her friend rough outlook most pessimistic. "Remember how I told you Herschel Burkhart suggested I get a life?" The sob. Libby smiled. She had gone back and forth between anger and lingering affection for her old boss. She had found Herschel, despite the fact that he had done her a grave disservice. Robin apparently didn't share her opinion. You know what? Libby asked, forcing herself. It's time I own up to the truth. I'm starting to realize Herschel was right. You have a life, Lim. Libby shook her head. I don't anymore, and I'm so miserable I hardly know what to do with myself. Oh, I joined a gym. That's one positive. Actually, I felt like I had to do something and fast. After all the weight I've gained, thankfully Robin hadn't seen fit to mention it. I'm so fat. Robin merely choked on her sandwich. You are not fat. Waistband. I'm up 10 pounds. Nothing fits. Fat, Robin insisted. If anyone is out of shape, it's me. I have gained 15 pounds in the last 6 years and can't seem to get rid of it. Libby's eyes widened and she waved her hands excitedly as she finished chewing a bite of her sandwich. Come on to the gym with me. We'll sweat off those excess pounds together. Automatically, Robin shook her head. Like I have time to work out. You need to make time. Robin hesitated and then shook her head again. If you saw my caseload, you'd understand. There will always be cases that need your attention. It's time to take care of yourself. I walked to work every morning and thought I was in shape. All it took was a mile and a half on a treadmill to prove how wrong I was. Exercise is important for both your physical and mental health. If you don't take care of yourself, no one else will. Libby repeated the words of a sales pitch she had repeated. Maybe it would work with Robin, too. Her friend frowned and set her spoon down on the table as though giving the idea serious consideration. Libby was prepared to argue the benefits of exercise. She needed somebody. Miss Universe had urged her to bring a friend, telling her it would help with motivation. If you told me 6 months ago I'd be spouting off the advantages of an exercise routine, I would have taken your temperature, Libby added. But working out will do us both good, and I've already lost 3 pounds. Libby didn't expect Robin to take her up on her offer, but she felt she should try. Libby nodded. So exaggerated a little, but she was down a couple of pounds. It wasn't enough to make a difference in how her clothes fit, but every little bit helped. What she didn't mention was that it felt like she had chiseled off those miserable pounds 1 ounce at a time. They hadn't come off easily. How often do you go? Robin asked, slowly taking another bite of her turkey sandwich. Me, right now, every day. She had had the time, so why? It actually helped her mental outlook, and while she hadn't made any friends, she saw a number of the same people every day, then nodded at one another and traded off machines. I can't do every day. I'll meet you on the days you go, Libby promised. I'd have Libby would need to change her time, no problem. She knew how to set her alarm. Great. She hadn't expected it to be this easy to recruit Robin, but she knew it would do her friend good. Then, as if suddenly remembered she had limited time, Robin glanced at her watch. I've an errand to run before I head back to court, she said, pushing her plate aside. Mom's living in Florida now, and she asked me to pick up a skein of yarn for her. There's a yarn store close by. How many of you remember the yarn store from the first novel we read? Libby asked, looking around. Robin motioned her head across the street. A shop called A Good Yarn was directly opposite the French cafe. When Libby was a young girl, her mother had taught her how to knit. She had enjoyed it until her mom died, and then there hadn't been anyone to help her fix her mistakes or to explain how to read the patterns. In all the years since, Libby hadn't picked up her knitting needles. I'll come with you. And that takes us to chapter 3. How exciting! Do you guys remember the yarn store? And, of course, Blossom Street from the first novel we read? Oh, how fun! I can see that where this book is going, and it's all happening right there on Blossom Street. And we will be here next Wednesday at 9 p.m. with Chapter 3. Thank you for coming in. Don't forget to hit that like, and I hope you all have a beautiful night's sleep with awesome dreams. And I hope I've relaxed you enough to get those awesome dreams. Thanks for coming in, everyone. See you next week. Hugs, hugs.